thanks, Vaidehi, and thanks WIDS for giving me this opportunity. I am extremely honored to be here, and it is indeed my true pleasure. So, as mentioned, my topic today is about how we can use AI for automating some of the processes in the finance domain. As we know that AI is finding applications in so many domains these days, right? And then finance is one such domain. It is a very big domain which has very several complex processes. For example, let's consider the process of accounts payable, the AP process. Right? Within that process, there are so many different sub processes. Like there is processing of contracts, processing of invoices, there is audit, there is payment, accounting. So what I'm going to do in my talk is I'm going to focus on one such sub-process, which is the process of auditing expense report. And I'm going to walk you through it step by step of how this process works and how we can automate it and how we can use AI to empower the automation. So let's consider this process of auditing expense reports. Almost all companies have this process in place, right? So this is the process where employees submit expense reports and they go to the auditor, and the auditor actually checks them, makes corrections, either approves or rejects them, and so it's a long process, right? So let's go over this step by step, right? So for example, consider the employee. This employee wants to go on a business trip, right? And then on the business trip, there are several expenses that can incur, right? For example, there is travel. So the employee needs to book train tickets or plane tickets or flight tickets. Then there is commute, there's taxi, then there's accommodation, which has like hotel bills, and then there is of course meals, dinner, snacks, etc. Right? So just within the trip, the employee has to expense a bunch of different reports, a bunch of different receipts, right? So what the employee does is then he creates an expense report in which he attaches all these receipts, and then this goes to the accounting department. This actually goes to the auditor. Now the auditor's job is to actually verify every single item on the expense report, every single receipt, to make sure whatever the employee is claiming is correct, right? And it's not only that, the auditor has to do a lot of checks, right? The first and foremost check the auditor needs to do is to figure out whether the amounts that the employee is claiming really actually match with what the receipt is having, right? It also has to check whether the date is correct, the merchant is correct. So there are a lot of preliminary checks, which we call it receipt verification. In addition to that, every company, every organization has different policies, different rules, and so then the auditor needs to go through every single one of them. For example, a lot of companies have a per diem limit, so which means that you cannot exceed more than X amount of rupees or dollars in a given day. So for example, if the per diem limit is say 5,000 rupees for a meal, then what the auditor needs to do is group all the receipts for that given day, add them up, and then check whether is it within 5,000 rupees or not. In addition to that, there are other checks. For example, some companies do not allow purchase of items like alcohol or tobacco, and if they are found in the receipts, then they are unauthorized items. So the companies don't like that; they don't allow that kind of thing. So the auditors need to check through every item on the receipt to make sure that these items are not there. All the checks and balances, the rules of the companies are followed. So typically there are about 20 to 30 rules that the employee has to go through to make per receipt, to make sure that the claim is correct, and then he can finally approve it. So as we see that this process is very cumbersome, it is, it's prone to a lot of human errors, because the auditor has to do so many multiple checks. And sometimes the job gets even tougher when there is international travel, when there are different currencies involved, so the currency conversions have to be done, etc. So it can hit a lot of limitations. This current process can have a lot of limitations. For example, one of the limitations that we see is this is a typical fraud that can occur in a lot of companies, is duplicate receipts. So, for example, if an employee submits a receipt today, and then he or she submits the same receipt after 2 months, and here essentially the employee is trying to get paid twice for the same receipt, which is a fraud. But it's really hard for an auditor to remember, oh, what happened 2 months ago, what was the receipt 2 months ago, or even look through all the reports and expenses to figure out, okay, this is a duplicate receipt, right? So that is an inherent limitation of the system. There can be other limitations also. For example, some of the fraudulent behavior can be really hard to catch for the auditor. Like for example, in this example, Rancho Club, that's what this receipt says, and there is a bunch of items like Grey Goose and stuff like that.
Audio.
Now what can happen is what can happen is, I'm sorry, what can happen here is that there could be a policy that says that, we don't allow receipts from golf courses because that can be a personal item. And then here, it's very hard for the auditor to understand that, okay, this is indeed a golf course. You may have to look it up and figure it out. And so that's extra work for the auditor. Uh, so there are certain limitations that can be reached by this process. So this process now really screams automation, right? If we are able to automate it in some way, then we can really make it more efficient and make sure that all the requirements are met or the compliance is met, right? So let's see how we can add automation and which part we can add automation, right? So just to review, this is our process. We have expense reports, we have the auditor, and then the auditor takes an action whether he approves it or rejects it. So that's our basic process. Now, if you are able to somehow have a model or have a system or have a black box that does the job of an auditor, then potentially we can have a full automation of the workflow, right? So we can achieve an end-to-end workflow where the reports get fed to the system. The auditor black box does its magic, makes all the checks, makes a decision whether to approve or reject, and if it's an approve, the employee gets paid right away. So if we're able to have that kind of workflow, then we really streamline this process, make it faster, make it efficient. Everybody's happy. The employee also gets paid on time, and all the compliances are met. So we want to get there to that level of automation. Another factor that we can add in our automation is scale. Now, typically, an auditor can receive hundreds of such expense reports in a given day. If it's a big company with a lot of employees, then there could be hundreds and thousands of expense reports submitted that the auditors have to review. So, if we can add scale to this process and have the expense reports processed in real time, then that can save us a lot of time, right? As the reports arrive, they get audited. If everything is correct, the employee gets paid. So again, here by adding scale to the process, we can improve the speed. The third place where we can add automation is, as I mentioned earlier, that there are a lot of checks the auditor needs to do, maybe 20, 30 checks that the auditor needs to do. Now, it's possible for a human auditor that you may not go through all the lists, you might skip a few, or you might miss a few things, right? But if we have a system that can code all these things up and make sure that we go through all these checks correctly, then essentially we force or we enforce the policy requirement of that company. And finally, another benefit of our automation that can happen is that the system can be very configurable. So for example, if companies, they decide that, okay, my per diem is 5,000 rupees, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to make it 8,000 rupees, right? So that's just one change in the system, and that will get honored every time another report enters the system, right? So it's a very easy change to make. But if we have a human-driven system, then that has to be communicated to the auditors. The auditors need to remember that. So by adding automation at different points in this process, we can really streamline it, make it more efficient, and make it work with our policy. So this sounds great, right? And we feel like, yes, let's get there, let's do it. But I think we have to also have some caution. There is a quote by Harsh Sippy that says, automation is cost cutting by tightening the corners and not cutting them. So the crux of the automation is that it should enhance the current process, and it should also preserve the power of the current process. So it should not cut any corners. So we should not have an automation system that is compromising on certain things, right? It should enhance the power but preserve the current power of the system. And what is the current strength of our system right now? The current strength of the system is actually the human auditors, right? Human auditors, I mentioned that there are limitations, but also there is a strength in them, right? We as humans can easily scan a receipt. Here we can easily scan a receipt and tell, okay, Madeira is the merchant. This is the date time, 221.65 is the total, and these are the items that are purchased. So that level of cognition that the human auditors bring uh, is something that the automation system needs to mimic, right? It should not. It should, for it to be efficient, it should be at least as good as what the human auditors are doing, right? So the primary requirement becomes that we need a system that can read receipts, can understand the receipts, and then apply all the checks and balances. So this is where AI comes into picture. This is where the intelligence, the artificial intelligence, comes into picture, which can give us that kind of cognitive learning. So there is a very nice quote by Jan LeCun that says, our intelligence makes us human, and AI is an extension of that quality, right? So I truly believe that AI is an extension of our intelligence, right? And if we can use AI correctly to solve a sequence of narrow, small problems, combining them can help us achieve the level of cognition that we want, right? For example, if we have a system that can read, identify parts of the receipt, and then combine them together, that can achieve or sort of help us mimic what the auditors do, right? Uh, Luckily, we have so many advances in the field of AI these days. We have computer vision, machine learning, natural language processing. These are now the tools that we have at our disposal that can really help us achieve that level of cognition. So now let's go back to our process and see how we can make it AI driven, right? So let's review our process again. So here we get the receipt or the document that gets fed into our system. So the first and foremost thing we need to do is have the ability to extract out all the words from the document. So a human auditor would read the document, right? But the first step for an AI system is actually, let's pull all the words. So we need a computer vision system for extracting all the words from structured and unstructured documents. Now, once we have pulled all the words, the next step is we need to now understand what they mean, right? So a human auditor can easily read the words and understand what it means. But for the AI, we have to again go through a series of steps to actually train it to figure out what the connections are, what is the context, what is the semantics. So So again, here these are models related to giving us deeper understanding of the receipts. So here we use the power of NLP, natural language processing, some deep learning models to make these kind of connections for that document. Now, once we read the document, once we have kind of made these connections and extracted all the relevant entities, now is the time to have to apply all these rules, to add all our business logic, to make sure all the compliance is met. And then we can make an informed decision whether the expense report is qualified, or shall we go ahead and approve it or reject it. So at that point, after applying all the business decision, that's the point where we can sort of attach risk score, saying that, okay, everything, all the checks are passed, this is good to go, or, I found some alarming things in this document. Finally, the important step, the crucial step that which I believe every AI system should have is a mechanism of feedback, right? This is the mechanism where the auditors, their actions are read by the AI models. They are received by the AI models, where the AI models can go back, retrain themselves, configure themselves, and improve, right? So this continuous process of feedback and improvement is very crucial for any AI-driven system. So let's take a look at each of these modules and see what kind of challenges we can are there and how we can mitigate them. So as I mentioned, right, the first step is computer vision models. So this is the process of reading the words, right? So this is called the OCR, or optical character recognition model. The job of this is to extract all the words. Now, we don't, this is the part where the rubber meets the road, right? So this is where reality hits. So yeah, if we had a very ideal situation where the receipts are clean, very nice structure, we can read each and every single word, well, that would be great. But that's not how it is, right? In real world, we see different receipts come in different shapes and sizes. They are unstructured. Excuse me. And they have different colors, different fonts. So here the challenge of the OCR model is to really understand them, so we had to train on thousands and thousands of documents for the OCR models to actually really understand a lot of different nuances in the receipt. For example, here there is this rupee symbol, rupee 434.38, right? So the rupee symbol was sometimes throwing up the models. We were reading it as 2, and then that would really give a wrong amount in that case. So we had to do special conditioning for such symbols, train the model to understand the shape of these characters. These models are typically CNN-based convolution models. Have to add layers of convolutions for them to understand the structure, the shape, the symbols. The same we had to do for European symbols, pound symbols, etc. Another thing that was challenging is that the font can be different, right? And so one of the challenging fonts for the model was the dot matrix font. So dot matrix, even though it feels it's antiquated, it's still very much in use. When the receipts are printed, they have that dot matrix type kind of font. And a lot of the OCR models are trained on printed, which is not dot matrix, right? So again, here we had to work on different training mechanisms to understand the dot matrix fonts. And finally, to truly have a global solution, right, we need to have models that are multilingual. So you have to train on multiple languages, and especially on Asian characters, which can be extremely challenging. Another very challenging problem that happens all the time is the receipts come with background, right? This is very common. You are taking a picture of the receipt, and I also tend to keep my receipt on the desk, on the ground, on the carpet, on my laptop, and so the background gets captured with that receipt. Now, for a human auditor, it's very easy. We can understand added to the OCR words, and that was kind of messing up with the predictions, right? So here again, we had to use edge detection techniques to understand the background, the foreground, the contrast between the background and the foreground. We had to use models from like faster or CNN for really putting those anchor points and giving us those boxes. So finally, these models were able to detect the contrast, and then we were able to crop out the receipts, and then the OCR would be would not have noise, so much noise. Another challenging problem, it's very easy to figure it out. Oh, this looks like $72. I can read the receipt. But again, for a computer vision model, that's not the case. So we again have to teach the model, train the model to understand that there is a different lighting, there is a different contrast, the coloring pixels, they are slightly off, so there is compensation that needs to be done. So we have to add extra compensation to make sure that we kind of remove the shadow and then read the receipt as it should be. Another typical challenge that we faced for our computer vision models was, receipts. As I mentioned, they're not perfect. They're not printed. There can be handwritten amounts, and detecting handwritten numbers or digits is a very specialized OCR. So here again, we had to train deep learning models using convolution networks and sequence models, etc., to understand different styles of handwriting. Um, and handwriting is so personal, and it can have so many flavors, and so we really had to train on thousands and thousands of handwritten receipts to understand the shape, etc. And there are also challenges. For example, in this receipt, right, this is actually 10, but it kind of looks like 7 sometimes, the one. And we saw that a lot of German receipts had this style where they would write 1, in style of 7. And so again, that was something very characteristic. So we had to train the models to understand that. Another challenge was that there's the background lines that were throwing off the model because the system would not be able to distinguish between them. So had to train the system with those parameters. Again, there would be boxes. So there are sometimes boxes, and again, that would throw off the model because the boxes here, we would read it as 1. So again, we had to train the system to penalize for the boxes, etc., to make sure that it does not give weightage to that and then gives weightage to other features here. Similarly, there will be backgrounds. So again, we had to train the model to understand the background noise and how it can filter it out. That was a very interesting and challenging problem. We were able to train the models to at least to read the handwritten digits. Another challenge is, this is also a typical scenario where there are multiple receipts. You will group together and then take a picture and then upload it, right? So again, for a human auditor, I can easily say, oh yeah, there are 3 receipts here, there are 6 receipts here. But again, for a system, computer vision system, it's not very clear, right? So we have to specifically design it to understand that there are multiple receipts in this scenario and we have to extract them out. So here we face a lot of challenges. So first and foremost, the receipts would be aligned in a different way. So for example, here we see some receipts are vertically aligned, some are horizontally aligned. So we still have to work with that different alignment. The other challenging thing is, there again, it's not a perfect world. So the receipts would be crumpled, there would be folds, all kinds of, things that the model needs to the boundaries, and extract out the receipts. Now, for some of the receipts, there would not be boundaries. There would be just like a black and white image, and then the boundaries would blend in with the white, right? So again, it was only detecting edges would not suffice in that case. So here we had to look at the separation, the color, the concentration, and features like that to understand that there are multiple receipts here. So those are some of the challenges for reading the document, the OCR, right? Now that we have extracted all the words, the next challenge is we really have to identify different entities from the document. We have to understand their relationships. We have to make the connections. We have to get the semantics out of it. This is the most intelligent part of our system. Um, so, so here again, using AI for very narrow problems, that approach helps us here. So what we did was we had different AI models, a series of AI models that will work on extracting one entity or the other. So for example, one AI model for extracting just the merchant, another AI model for extracting the date, another for extracting the amount, another for extracting the itemized the itemizations in the receipt, right? And then each model has its own set of challenges. For example, in the amount model, it is important to understand the contextual information, right? So here there are a bunch of different numbers, but the contextual information that says total, it gives us a high signal that that is amount and not subtotal, right? And again, in this case, there is no such contextual information, but there are other signals that that 84 is like a very big font amount. It screams amount in this whole receipt. So the model has to understand that. Similarly, there are challenges for merchant models, right? So here, actually in this example, there are two merchants. There's booking.com and there is also this NYX hotel. Now, um, um, now again, by understanding auditor behavior, understanding company policies, these models can self-learn or understand that, okay, no, the actual merchant is booking.com because that's what is from the list of vendors that the company is approving. So by making these connections, we can then pick the correct amount and the correct merchant, etc. Now, once we have did our extraction, we also need to go further deeper sometimes. And that this is where we need to do some kind of entity classifications to really understand the semantics of what we have extracted. To be more specific, for example, here we extracted that this is the item, but this is 22 Acer. So it's an electronic item. So here now we have to go deeper and make that extra connection that says that this receipt has an electronics item. Similarly, here we can dig deep into this receipt and say, okay, the Grey Goose is actually alcohol. So this item is alcohol. So we have to classify it and then further call that out. So here we used a lot of semantic based models. Also, we also were able to harness the power of search here and web to really understand what these items mean. So now that we have extracted the documents, the words, added our extraction models, now is the time to actually add the business logic to make decisions whether to approve or not approve the expense report. So as I mentioned previously in my examples, that this kind of duplicate checks is extremely hard to do for a human auditor. But with the automation, there are a couple of things that we have at our disposal. First thing is with smart automation, we are also doing a lot of bookkeeping and we're keeping track of everything we see, right? So for example, in this case, say the first receipt arrived like 6 months ago. We still store it, we keep all the information. And another receipt, the second receipt arrives today, right? So when this receipt arrives today, I'm going to check with a history. I'm going to check against all the receipts to find duplicates. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the features that I extracted to help me identify the duplicates. For example, I extracted amount, I extracted merchant, I extracted date. These are the kind of features that I'm going to check that is there a duplicate receipt previously with the same amount, same date, same merchant, right? Then I can narrow down my search space. In addition to that, I can also use some of the image characteristics from these receipts to really understand duplicates. For example, there can be this logo, they have very similar image features. I can use them to figure out the duplicates. So the process of duplicates, which was so complicated, uh, now becomes easy because of our automation and bookkeeping. Um, and finally, now we can now apply using these extractions. We can now call out different things, right? So, for example, coming back to the example of the golf course, my extraction model predicted this is Rancho Club is the merchant. I can also use the power of web to further tell me that Rancho Club is a golf course. So I can use other sources that are now available at my disposal and can do it in an automated fashion to understand that, okay, Rancho Club with this address is actually a golf course. Similarly, Grey Goose is alcohol. Here, I can also verify that Caesar's Nails and Spa is actually a spa. So I can call those out, and then the auditor can look at it and say, oh, yeah, they are out of policy. They are not allowed. It's kind of, I'm going to take action on that. So the auditor's job becomes much easier at this point because all this information is now bubbled up and presented. There is one very specific example that we actually see a lot, and the companies are really surprised by it. So in this case, like this receipt, right? So it is it's fairly simple receipt, right? There is a merchant called Diamond Lounge, and then there is some amount that is claimed and looks like a meal receipt, and because there is table and everything, so it seemingly it's a simple receipt. But what we found is that this merchant, Diamond Lounge, is actually an adult entertainment facility. And so we were able to find that and call that out that this is indeed an unauthorized merchant. And so that kind of gives more information to the auditor and the people in charge to take specific actions for this and discourage these kind of submissions. So the final process that I was talking about is about the feedback, right? This is the mechanism where now the auditors, they can take actions and those can be communicated back to the model and the models can improve upon. One thing I would like to point out is the AI models are not perfect, right? They are not going to be 100% accurate. No system is perfect, right? There's a very nice quote by Mark Twain that says, continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. So even though the AI models are not going to be 100% perfect, they can be continuously improving. And how can they improve is by observing what the auditors are doing, by getting their feedback, observing their actions, both implicit and explicit actions, can help the AI models to learn the behavior of the auditor, and they can help the models to give a more customized experience to that company, because auditors from different companies can have different behaviors. But if our models can learn that, then they can have a more customized experience. So here, what the proposal is a very key important thing here is that we are not removing the auditor from the loop. In fact, the auditor or the human auditor is but if the system finds certain things, certain frauds, or they can be presented to the auditor. So the auditor just has to review only them. So the job of the auditor becomes much more easier. And also the auditor can give feedback on top of that, saying that, okay, this looks like a fraud, the system is correct. Or it can say that, okay, this actually is not a fraud, or this we allow it. So then the system can learn that, okay, we will improve next time. So the synergy between the humans and the AI is crucial and very important for the development of AI systems. What is the impact of of this whole automation, AI driven automation? So clearly the biggest impact that we see is in savings, right? Saving time and money, right? Because the system can find fraud, can find errors, then it can the companies can save money because they don't have to say pay two times, so they can catch all these fraudulent merchants, etc. The second thing that we saw is because we could streamline the process and add more power and automation, and we could do this whole process faster in real time. So as the reports arrive, they can go through this process, and the employees can get paid out really quick. So we can make it faster. We can make sure that the compliance is achieved, all the rules are being checked. Um, and the whole complexity of having 40 to 50 different rules is reduced because that is now all coded in the system. Uh, so that is a big saving, right? The other saving that we also see is this automation can AI powered automation can also drive behavioral changes. For example, employees are now more encouraged to submit on time, submit good quality receipts, because they know that the system is working and they'll get paid on time. On the other hand, they are also discouraged from doing fraudulent activities. So this inherently changes the behavior of the employees. Another good thing with automation is the bookkeeping that we do, right? We do the bookkeeping that gives us analytics. So managers can have a better understanding of how the spend of the employees are, like where are they spending the most, are they spending on meals, travel, and within meals, what is the spend like. So they can plan budgets accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, that auditors have a reduced workload, so they can focus on the challenging tasks. They can focus on getting the more potential. And finally, again, the CFOs can get better understanding of their company's budget, and they can plan accordingly. AI-driven automation in this for this expense audit process is just the beginning. It's just scratching the surface, right? There are so many complex processes, as I mentioned, invoice processing, contracts. They can all benefit, and they are complex processes, but with the power of AI, they can be automated. Uh, One key crucial thing that I would like to point out is that AI can empower us individuals because it can help us realize our potential and unleash our potential, and thereby help companies at large. So success of AI is not in replacing humans. Uh, we are not replacing the auditors, but actually the success lies in the synergy between the humans and uh, the AI. So the AI systems working closely with humans is a true powerful system. With that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a wonderful talk. Let me tell you that being a student myself, I have been very inspired by how AI works. And right now, in the conversations, we have a few questions coming up for you.
Sure.
So, Aparna ma'am here will be, giving you all the questions. Okay, I hand it over to Aparna ma'am.
Hello, everyone. First of all, Deepti, it was an amazing talk and fantastic things you have shared. And there are some questions which I would like to read out for you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, my camera is not working somehow, so you need to see my photograph only.
That's fine.
Yeah. So the first question is, do we know any system or machine scanning system which automatically reads the text of bills to see whether it matches policies like ban on alcohol or personal expenses, etc.? This question is asked by Rishikesh Khandekar, who is a director of finance, MCure Pharmaceuticals Limited.
So, so as I mentioned, right, at AppZen, we had to build our own system for understanding the bills and understanding the items from that. So there is, it's there are systems that can do components of this, but the whole package has to be more customized. And so at AppZen, we do have those kind of systems in place, but we had to build a lot of things ground up. So there are some parts that are available, but there is like the whole package is not readily available as such. But there are again different parts that can be worked on. So there is the piece of OCR, as I mentioned, that can extract the words. Then once the words are extracted, then there are a series of models, that NLP based models, that need to be developed to understand the contextual information. And NLP based models here can be trained on vocabulary of alcohol, and then they can classify them. So this comes into the realm of entity classification problem that can
Yeah,
actually try to classify them. Yeah.
yeah, that's good. Thank you. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, One of the other interesting questions is, what could you suggest to the attendees who are willing to take a career in the domain of financial modeling?
So I would first suggest is that it's very important to understand the domain very well, or understand the process in the domain, right? Like here I explained one such process, which is the process of auditing expenses, but there are so many other processes, right? It's very crucial to understand the current processes and find the gaps there. Like, what is the gap here? Where is the pain point? Right? Where is the pain point of the employee, the pain point of the person who is auditing or accounting or something, right? Once we understand those pain points, then we can figure out how we can find out solutions that can help them. Yeah, so I would definitely highly recommend that, getting an understanding of the whole process, and then we can apply solutions.
Yeah, thanks. As we are limited by our time, and so I would be taking next and last question. Are there any generic pre-trained models available on which one can customize for any module of this system? And if yes, can you point out a few?
There are some pre-trained models. These days, we've been experimenting with BERT-based models, which actually was developed by Google, and they trained on trillions, like millions and millions of data, and they do a lot of things like document classification, because they have been trained on so much data. They can and state of the art technology, and they have ways to fine tune for your data. So
Yeah.
basically, you can take that pre-trained model, take those weights, and then you can add your own data to fine tune it so it gets customized to your requirements. So I would say that that is definitely state of art these days.
Uh, Deepti, as you mentioned about the BERT models, my
Mhm.
own experience tells me that BERT takes a lot of time, as
Yeah,
well as in terms of carbon footprint. BERT's carbon footprint is very high.
yeah.
Any comments on this?
Yes, yes, it is a very heavy model.
Yeah.
There are different flavors also. There is BERT Lite also. There are small BERT models also there that we have used, but they are still resource intensive. They do require a lot of GPU training. Um, there are other lightweight models also. Like TensorFlow actually has a lot of implementations of some of the models these days. The TensorFlow community is very active. They do have some models. They have implementations of sequence to sequence model. They have implementations of transformers also, which can be used pretty much out of the box. They also provide a lot of data sets, training data sets in the TensorFlow dataset community, which can help you understand the model, quickly train them, and see how it works, and then you can
Mm-hmm.
use it for your purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot, Deepti.
Mhm.
There are many interesting questions coming up, but in interest of time, what I suggest to the attendees is you can meet the speaker in the lounge, and she might be answering few more queries there. And let me now hand over it to my co-host Vaidehi to thank the speaker and to conclude the session. Thanks a lot, Deepti. It was
Thank
fantastic.
you. Thanks. My pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is a great session. Thank you, Dipti ma'am, for joining all over from the United States, and wish you a very happy International Women's Day. And I'm sure this session has inspired a lot of young girls to take up careers in AI, in automation and finance. So thank you so much for joining. So all the attendees, you can still meet our speaker Deepti ma'am in the speakers lounge, and she's available at table 3. So please move to the networking lounge area and you can meet our speakers. You can also meet other mentors, participants, and in fact in the arena we have set up about 14 booths for you to network with people. So join the arena also. You can also join track 1, which is live from Stanford right now, and do take the skill assessment test and come back at 11 a.m. for the next session. So thank you so much, Deepti ma'am.
Thank you. My pleasure.